Ah,
Shalom Aleichem, Doron. How are you?
Shalom Aleichem. I'm good. How are you?
Fantastic. Very well.
Okay, great. I'm glad. Now, the most important thing, you can hear me clearly?
I hear you fine. Let me shut some noise over here.
Okay, great. We're starting in 10 minutes. I got the mountain time right?
Correct. We're starting in
Okay.
6 minutes.
Oh, that's right. Okay. I was like concerned. I checked like 3 times. Okay, Wyoming, mountain time, 1 hour. I was just like, I haven't done it before, so very rarely. Okay,
Yes.
anything I should know?
I think that the main thing to know is that we want people to walk away from this with a sense of the importance of burial, obviously. And our main goal is for people to feel like they can make a educated decision, particularly if they've already made a decision to cremate. So we have some people that we're expecting to be joining us that have already made such a decision, and I'm doing it literally for one person. This whole thing is for one person. Anyone else who joins Gesundheit Hate, it's wonderful. But I recently had a conversation with a person, and I'm hoping that they'll join. They told me that they're going to join, and I'm hoping that they'll walk away with a feeling to have excitement and energy. Their 86th birthday is coming up, and I'd like for them to make a better decision as it relates to this. I haven't had success with convincing them. I'm hoping a third party with some information and a warm, energetic, enthusiastic, passionate presentation will help them come to that decision.
Okay, great. Great. So in that case, I'm going to get everything ready. I'm here. I'm leaving it on. I'll just be back in 5 minutes.
Perfect. Fantastic. Thank you very much. Raise. איפה את? We are going to be starting in just a couple of minutes. We're going to be going live on Facebook at the same time. Just hold. We are taking care of some technical things and we'll be right back. Yes, sir. We are going live on Facebook and we'll be ready to start in just a minute. Please bear with us as we take care of the technical challenges. Okay, thank you all so much for being here with us on this beautiful Jackson Hole afternoon. It is a great pleasure to welcome each and every one of you here, and I'm sure that some more will be joining us here shortly. It's a beautiful day and it's hard to get back inside from the great outdoors. My name is Rabbi Zalman Mendelsohn, and I am here together with my dear wife, Rebbetzin Razy Mendelsohn, for this fascinating get-together to discuss the subject of cremation versus burial, Judaism on death, aging, and the afterlife with our guest host, Doron Kornbluth. Doron is a best-selling author and renowned lecturer, and he has spent years delving deep into the Jewish sources and speaking with experts and environmentalists, reading industry reports and academic studies, and examining both the realities on the ground and the philosophies of these sensitive questions, including cremation versus burial. We are thrilled to host him and to address the Wyoming Jewish community. Before we get started, I'd like to just begin with a brief moment recognizing and acknowledging the terrible tragedy that recently took place on Mount Meron in Israel with the loss of many lives during the Lag BaOmer celebration. A time of great joy turned into a time of great sadness. And as we all know, it is impossible to understand the ways of God or why this tragedy has happened. But what we could take away from this is the knowledge that at any point in time, it is entirely possible that we can find ourselves in a terrible, tragic situation. And we have to be good with God and good with our loved ones as that time approaches. Now more than ever, with all of the sadness, all of the pain, and all of the suffering, I encourage each of you to, at the same time that we don't want to delve into and spend too much time thinking about the inevitable and the painful realities that come along with that, at the same time, we need to be best prepared and have the best information at our disposal so we can make healthy, positive decisions about our afterlife. It is my great pleasure and honor to welcome Doron Kornbluth to please present for us his thoughts, his knowledge, his education, and his wisdom on the subject of cremation versus burial and the general approach to Jewish afterlife. Please put your hands together for Doron.
Thank you very much, Rabbi. So nice to be with you. I hear how beautiful Wyoming is. Now I can see it. Maybe someday it'll be in person, but pleasure to be with you. Thank you for organizing. Hello to everybody on Zoom and on YouTube. Zoom people, I can see your names. YouTube, I can't. But it's nice to be with you. My name is Doron, and I want to share a few ideas with you. Whenever I think of this subject, and I'm invited to speak about it quite often, whenever I think of this subject, I always think of this saying that I heard. A comedian once said, "I don't want to achieve immortality through my work. I want to achieve it through not dying." Meaning there's some things that are just kind of like taboo. We don't want to talk about them. We don't want to hear about them. There were some societies in human history that, as far as we know archaeologically, it's hard to know for sure, but as far as we know archaeologically, there were some societies that were very focused on death. The Tibetans, the Egyptians had books of the dead. We see what was, put in the pyramids with the pharaohs. There were dead slaves and foodstuffs and bows. Like it seems that their culture was very much focused on what happens in the afterlife. Interestingly, the modern world is not like that. The Western world is certainly not like that. We're just kind of uncomfortable with it. We don't like thinking about it. There are some people who are into it, but a very small minority. Anybody remember the name John Glenn? You remember the name John Glenn? Right? He was a famous astronaut, one of the Apollo missions, I don't know which one. Then he became a US Senator from Ohio, very dignified, honorable person. And then he did something that was, to many people's minds, like the most impressive thing he ever did. He went back into space. I believe he was like 75 years old or something. He was like the oldest person to ever be in space. And it was the front page of Time Magazine and New York Times. It was like a huge thing. I remember when he went back, and everybody was very, very impressed by John Glenn. And I was too. It's hard not to be. He passed tests that I couldn't pass when I was 25, But I was also a little embarrassed for us, because why were we as a society showing respect and admiration for John Glenn? Not for his experience, not for his wisdom. We were admiring that he could act like a young guy. And you see that a lot in the Western world. There's little respect for the elderly, for the aging, for the sick. It's almost like just a nuisance. All the more so for the dead. Like what like if you're not contributing, forget it. So sick people don't contribute. And there's a certain lack of a holistic view of the life cycle, including death, of the contributions of all of us. And it's even interesting, by the way, that even Judaism, classic Judaism, when Jews have a drink, what do we say? L'chaim, to life. We're focused on life. True, there are laws about what to do when a person dies, and we have a firm belief in the afterlife, and it is talked about, but not too much. We're not supposed to focus on, what happens after. God gave us an opportunity to bring spirituality into our lives, to help others, to raise up this world. We're focused on Chaim, on life. So it kind of makes sense that, it's kind of uncomfortable. People don't like to, I hear it. People don't like talking about things that are kind of depressing. And that's all well and good, unless you have to make a decision. And today, many people have made decisions or are making decisions about what to do with their bodies without having done proper research and without giving them proper information on which to make a decision. The decision is yours, but it's important that we have some basic facts. And so, although we don't like talking too much about this kind of thing, understandably so, kind of morbid, then it's important that we speak a little bit about it so that people will be able to decide for themselves. So interestingly, throughout all of history, Jews were known as the people that buried the dead. Roman historian Tacitus, when he described us to his compatriots, one of the few outstanding characters, one of the few things that he said about us, the Jews bury rather than burn the dead. It stood out. And it was true for nearly 4,000 years until recently, until basically the last generation, when things have changed dramatically. Can anybody guess? I like, for those of you who are on Zoom, there's a great thing about Zoom called the chat function, and for me, it's on the bottom of my screen. So I'm going to ask you some questions. You can put them into the chat. If you're on YouTube Live and you want to participate, please do switch over to Zoom, and you can ask, you can ask questions and answer my questions. So my first question, ladies and gentlemen, is what percentage of Jews today in the U.S. Let's just talk about the USA. What percentage of Jews today who die, dead Jews, are being cremated? Anybody know? It's a shocker, actually. The national statistic for all Americans, you can put it in the chat box if you have a guess. You're allowed to get it wrong, don't worry. So the national statistic for all Americans, Christians, Buddhists, Jews, whatever, in 2017 switched over to be majority cremation, meaning in 2017, 50.1% of all Americans who died were cremated, right? By the way, today, right, it's already 2021, they estimate it's about 53% of all Americans who die are cremated. There's, almost the rest, all the rest are buried. There's a few things, some individuals do some interesting things, but that's basically it. Kate, you're saying 20, thank you for responding. So we don't know for sure how many Jews, but I'll share with you one stat and we're going to extrapolate from there. About 10 years ago, in 2011 or 2010, something like that, Rabbi Elchanan Zone, who's kind of like the rabbi's rabbi on these matters, all the Chevra Kadishas, the Burial Societies go to him. And he's the head of the Chevra Kadisha in New York and the National Association of Chevra Kadishas. So he did an informal study of Jewish funeral homes in the New York area. And he found that 25% of the requests in Jewish funeral homes in the New York area in 2010 were for cremations. Now, that's 10 years ago. It's gone up dramatically. That's for people who live in New York, the most culturally Jewish part of the country. And that's people who choose Jewish funeral homes. For all of those who are not particularly affiliated or don't choose any funeral home or a non-Jewish funeral home or whatever, it's going to be much higher. Conservative estimate today is that 1/3 of the Jewish dead are being cremated. It's probably more likely 40%, and it's going up. So my question to you, and for this, I need your help, ladies and gentlemen, beautiful people of Wyoming. Use the chat function. Why are people of all faiths and backgrounds, not just Jews, Christians, everybody in America, why are Americans today choosing cremation more than ever before? When you and I were kids, single digits cremated. Cremation has always existed as an option. It has always been there. In fact, archaeologically, it was the classic way of doing things. Yet when you and I were kids, right, it was single digits. For Jews, 2%, 1%, 3%. For the general American population, 6%, 7%. It was never the norm. And yet, in our generation today, it has become the majority, the norm. And I want to know why. This may be reasons that you've made a decision, or you're thinking about it, or your relatives have, or you've heard on the news. So I see, thank you very much, Fran. So I see Darcy is saying, we're gonna use the, Steve, I'm sorry, because there's a lot of people, we can't, I'll tell you how we go. We're gonna now talk about the basics, and then we're gonna get to a question and answer period at the end where we'll turn off the mutes and everybody will be able to speak. But for now, let's just use the chat. People are saying cost. Krista and Darcy are saying cost. Any other reasons? You're absolutely right. That's a big one. Any other reasons why you think people are choosing cremation today? Very good. Tyson, I hear that. Transient society. Most people don't live in the same place for very long. Excellent. We're going to talk about it. Thank you for sharing. Anybody else? You're getting some of the big ones. This is good. I'm impressed, Wyoming. This is pretty quick. Rabbi and Rebbitzin, you're allowed to answer things that people have told you. I'm sure you've had this discussion with every Jewish Wyoming. What do you call somebody who lives in Wyoming? Wyoming. Wyomingian?
Wyomingite.
Wyomingite. First time in my life I've heard that word. Thank you very much. Okay, environmental reasons. Rabbi, that's exactly what I was looking for. Thank you very much. He also says cowboy. At first, I thought that you were giving a reason as to why people are choosing cremation. It took me a second to understand. Okay, so you're getting. If you have any other answers, please do type them in. That's great. And you're getting the main ones. There's a lot of reasons why people choose cremation today. People of all types, all Americans. Let's forget about the Jewish thing for the minute. For some people, there's environmental concerns. Right, that's what Stephen, thank you, and what the rabbi said. And there's two kinds of environmental critiques of burial. One is the amount of land that is used, and one is, that's it, exactly right, Rabbi, the lack of land space, that's the amount of land that is used, and one is what goes into the land. Let's discuss these briefly. What we're going to do today in our short time together is I want to analyze the reasons that people today of all types are choosing cremation. Between you and me, we're going to find out that some of those reasons are absolutely not true. They make no sense. It's misinformation. One of those reasons is actually valid. I'm very honest, very straight. We're going to see which makes sense, which don't make sense, and then we're going to flip it and we're going to go and discuss. So why do Jews favor burial, and why has it always been that way? We're going to get a little bit into the subject, and then we'll get into your questions and comments, right? First, we're going to analyze the reasons for cremation. Then we're going to focus on why Jews are focused on burial. And then we're going to get into your questions and comments. Okay, so the environmental reasons that people talk about for cremation. Number one, the amount of space. It's a moral argument, by the way, and a very strong one, meaning we have a limited amount of land. We have a growing population. So if you're a good person, why would you waste valuable land on burial plots that dead people don't need? Save it for the parks and the trees and the kids and the playgrounds and the forests, right? And you and I both know that if we had to choose between land for the dead and land for the living, if there was a choice that you had to make, there's no choice. I mean, what do we say when we have a drink? L'chaim, right? I mean, life's more important. There's only one issue. I did the math. I'm not the first person to do the math, but I did it. It's been checked. I wrote a book on this subject. The book is called Cremation or Burial, A Jewish View from Mosaic Press, 2014. Since that time, I have been traveling. Well, before COVID, I was traveling around speaking about the subject a lot. I speak about other subjects, but this is like the number one request I get. Now I'm giving, in the last year, Zooms on the subject at least once a week, I would say. And I have never been called out on the following numbers, okay? So just listen to the following numbers. Please check it yourself, okay? If every American who died, and I'm only talking to the Jews, 1.8% or whatever it is, right? But if every American, there's roughly a 1% death rate in Western countries, meaning there's 340 million Americans. So every year you'll have just under 3 million deaths. This year, unfortunately, past year, unfortunately, was slightly higher because of the crisis, right? So that's how you work it. So if all 3 million Americans who died were to be buried, get this, it would take 10,000 years to use up 1% of America's landmass. That's how much land we have. In Wyoming, I don't have to tell you this, but it's not just Wyoming. All over America, there is a ton of land available. True, if you want to be buried in Manhattan or downtown Miami or South LA, you've got a problem. But within 30 minutes or 60 minutes of every metropolitan area, there is a ton of land. There is no land problem whatsoever. This is true in North America. This is true in South America. This is true in Europe. This is true in Africa. This is true in Asia. This is true in Australia. There's only 3 places, to my knowledge, that this is not true: Hong Kong, Singapore, and parts of Japan. And by the way, I've looked into it very carefully. There are solutions for each of those areas. By the way, serious environmentalists never mention the lack of space argument for cremation. Don't mention it at all, because it's not true. There's plenty of land. How often do you go to a cemetery anyway? You can't drive half an hour out of town to get to the cemetery. I mean, an hour out of town, it's just not true. The more serious environmental argument, And I'm an environmentalist. I grew up, it means a lot to me. And, I'm my part-time, my side job before COVID is I'm a tour guide in Israel, or at least I was one before COVID. And I go hiking and I love nature. I'm very into it. So it means a lot to me. And the serious environmental critique of burial is not about the amount of land. That's not an issue. It's what goes into the land. Two main components: metal caskets. We're talking Golden Gate Bridge after Golden Gate Bridge after Golden Gate Bridge. You got to make the metal, form it, put it into the casket. It goes into the ground. It rusts for thousands of years. And embalming. If you're not aware of what embalming is, I don't want to get too gory, but this wasn't talking burial and cremation. So, they remove the liquids, basically the blood from a body, replace it with preservatives. Formaldehyde is still the #1 choice, by the way, for embalming. Of course, the body still, decomposes eventually. It just takes longer, so the viewing, whatever. So these two things, metal caskets and embalming, right, are terrible for the environment. Horrible. This is why there's a serious environmental critique of burial. Now, my question to you, ladies and gents: anybody notice anything that these two methods, metal caskets and embalming, have in common? Anything that these two things have in common? Use the chat function if you can guess. Rabbi and Rebbitzin, you better know the answer, but you're not allowed to answer. What do you think, guys? I see people smiling, so I'll save us some time. They're not Jewish. We don't do either. We don't do metal caskets, supposed to be simple wood caskets. By the way, in Israel, where I live, in Israel, they actually don't bury in a casket. If you happen to see the tragic scenes from Thursday in Israel, the bodies are in shrouds. They'll carry it to the gravesite in a casket, but when the body is actually buried in the ground, there's no casket. It's only in burial shrouds. Caskets are reused, interestingly enough. Even in most places that you need caskets because of municipal laws or tradition or whatever it is, Judaism insists on simple wood caskets. Usually pine is what's chosen. They put a few holes in the bottom so that it'll decompose, naturally, and biodegradable, stuff. We don't do metal caskets. What about embalming? Definitely not. Considered a desecration of the holiness of the body of the person who died. By the way, if you want to understand why Judaism is so against embalming, just go to YouTube and watch one. You will understand in about 30 seconds why it is not respectful to the body. I mean, it's, oh my gosh. So Jewish burial has always been known as a model of environmentalism. Environmentalists are not in favor of cremation. Cremation uses a ton of fossil fuels. We're all getting rid of our gas guzzling cars and going to electric, right? Trying to end our dependence on oil. And suddenly we're firing up the crematorium, uses a tremendous amount of energy, and it releases toxic chemicals into the air. There was an article in the Los Angeles Times, you can Google this, about 2 months ago, maybe 3 months ago, that the city of Los Angeles, 2021, maybe the end of 2020, but I think it's 2021, had to loosen its regulations on air pollution because due to the pandemic, there's more cremations going on than ever before. And cremations lead to air pollution. And there were strict rules in place about how many cremations could happen on a given day. And the city had to relax the rules because they have to cremate more. Cremation is bad for the environment. If you are like me and you have a filling in your teeth and you're like 50 or above, oh, got a filling, it's probably mercury, right? Younger people who have fillings, they don't use mercury anymore. But for our generation and older, that's terrible. Many municipalities have the rule that you're not allowed to have a crematorium beside a school. Ask yourself why. Environmentalists are not in favor of cremation. They're in favor of what's called green burial. The main components of green burial: no metal caskets, no embalming. There's other issues as well. And it's how the cemetery is divided up, things like that. Okay, I get it, absolutely. Some are better, some are worse, they're getting better. But it has nothing to do with it. Jewish burials are a model of environmentalism. Another thing that was mentioned, Tyson, you mentioned transient society. Absolutely. I hear this a lot, actually. By the way, it clicked for me in Florida. In Florida, there's a very high rate of cremation. And there's a lot of reasons for it. And one of them is that there's a lot of retirees in Florida. So the older person is going to say, so where am I going to be buried exactly? Where's my grave going to be? Here in Florida? Everybody I know is in their 80s in the retirement community. They're all going to be dead, same time more or less than I am. Back in New York, I haven't lived there for 30 years, right? In California, where the kids are, I don't know anybody there. And how long are they going to be there? The grandkids may not even stay there. In other words, nobody's ever going to visit my grave. So why bother having one? It's a pretty good question, right? I think this is probably what you meant, Tyson. Correct me if I'm wrong. In the old country, people used to have one, family plot. They would, generate. It was kind of sweet. You live together, people die together. You go visit. But now people aren't traditional, so they don't visit, or they live in different cities, so they don't visit. So what's the point in having a grave if nobody's going to visit it? So I would like to test your Jewish knowledge. No marks will be given. Don't worry. We're going to do a little trivia, okay? At the end of the Bible, at the end of the Torah, there is a famous death. Moses dies. True or false? His place of burial is the #1 tourist site in Israel today. Thumbs up if it's true. His place of burial is the #1 tourist site in the state of Israel. Thumbs up if it's true. Thumbs down if it's false. Or type it into the chat. What do you think? Is it true? It's the #1 site? Stephen is saying no, it's false. Reverend is saying false. Leon, what do you say, man? I see you, but I don't see what you think. Krista is saying false. Ooh, Leon got it. It's a trick question, guys. First of all, Moses is not buried in Israel. Remember Martin Luther King Jr. in one of his final speeches, he uses the poetic imagery of Moses at the end of the Bible. I've gone up a mountain, I've looked into the promised land. Moses never made it into the promised land. Long story as to why, but he's buried in what's now the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan on the east bank of the Jordan River. And second reason, which is exactly what you said, Leon, right on, good job, I'm impressed. You're making me hungry over there. I don't know what you're cooking, Leon. But the second reason is we don't know where he's buried. God hid the place of his burial. The commentators explain because we didn't know, because he didn't, God knew that there was a risk there. That if Moses was such a great prophet, that his place of burial could become a pilgrimage site of idol worship, as if he was some kind of a god. So God hid the place of his burial, so we don't know where he's buried. So no one has knowingly been to his burial place. So think about it. Has anyone ever visited the grave of Moses? No, that's the point. We just said no, not knowingly. And yet, God chose burial. Cremation existed 3,000 years ago. In fact, archaeologically, we know it was the norm then. Yet God did not choose cremation or any other method of disposal. He chose burial. Because get this, we in our modern minds, we think visiting a grave and having a grave are two connected ideas. And why do you have a grave? So people will visit a grave. And if nobody's going to visit a grave, why bother having one? So that's why so many people today are saying, well, my kids aren't religious, my grandkids aren't religious, they're not traditional, they live in a different city. There's no point, nobody's going to visit the grave. But one of the most famous burials, deaths in Jewish history, in the Bible, in the Torah, teaches us this incredible lesson that having a grave and visiting a grave have nothing to do with each other. And if you like visiting graves, I do, by the way. Don't worry, I don't go every day. I'm not a weirdo, but I connect to it. I'm from Montreal originally. Whenever I go to Montreal, I try and visit my grandparents' grave, my great-grandparents. It means something to me, but you don't have to. There's no obligation in Judaism to visit graves. If you connect to it, great. If not, not. Right? It can be a beautiful thing for some people and other people, but that has nothing to do with having a grave. By the way, it's interesting how Sometimes it's a grandkid or a great grandkid or a kid who gets a little more traditional or into Jewish genealogy and family tree, and they want that place of connection. But even without that, other reasons that people choose, that people cite for cremation today, right? It's quick and easy. I've heard this a lot of times. I don't know if you've ever heard this idea. Well, it's interesting. When I got into the subject, I'll tell you I spent a lot of years researching it and reading about it. And before I got into the subject, before I was like my curiosity was piqued, I didn't know much at all about cremation or burial. So I want to tell you the biggest surprise that I had when I was researching the subject. The number one surprise I had is that I always assumed that cremation was a little bit like a microwave oven. Stick the thing in, press the button, 3 minutes later, 2 minutes later, 5 minutes later, an urn pops out with ashes. Sorry, guys. Forgive me, this is going to be the gross part of the talk. Okay, I'll try not to make it too gory, but you knew it was a talk about death and burial and aging and all that kind of stuff. So, you knew it was going to be something a little uncomfortable. A typical cremation today for a thin person is 60 to 90 minutes. If, like me, you are a little overweight, the COVID-19 they talk about, COVID-19, the 19 pounds that we all put on sitting inside and whatever. I don't know if you had that in Wyoming or because you have so much room, you were out free. But if you're a little bit overweight, like most people, then it's 2 to 3 hours. If a person is obese, according to the BMI scale, 30 or above, I hope I'm not heading there, but it's not looking good, then, we're talking 3 to 4 hours. During that time, the body is not calm and placid and quiet. No, the body is moving, the muscles are expanding and contracting, the brain is sizzling. It is a long, disgusting process. Cremation is not calm or quick or placid. And I'm not going to be here and honestly make a claim and tell you that burial is pleasant. Okay, I remember high school labs. Okay, decomposition is gross. I'm just saying they're both kind of gross, right? The only thing is, burial is the natural way of every living thing. A plant grows, blossoms, goes back to Mother Earth. An animal is born in the forest, runs around, lays down, goes back to Mother Earth. Burial is natural. Cremation is a man-made artificial grab at control. It's an amazing insight. Ladies and gents, when we go through the reasons that people choose cremation today, mobility issues, the idea of environmental issues, not having land. When we go through all the reasons, quickness, they actually don't make sense. They're actually not true, except one. There is one, and only one, by the way, one reason for cremation that is undeniable, and we have to be fully honest about the fact that it's a major advantage. What is that? Ladies and gents, it's cheaper. Cremation is generally cheaper, generally much cheaper, by the way. There are exceptions. You can do a very expensive cremation and you can do a cheap burial. COVID has taught us, graveside, things were closed. You can flip it. But for most people in most situations, we must be honest. A typical cremation is costing them, everything together, $2,000 to $3,000. Typical burial is costing them everything together $8,000 to $10,000. Meaning, Rabbi, tell me if I'm right about the difference in Wyoming. In most places, there's about a $5,000 difference between the typical cost of a cremation and the typical cost of a burial. Exceptions on both sides. But for most people, when they make the decision, and you may have already made this decision, and let's talk about it and we'll get some information because that's why we're here, right? For most people, cost is a factor. It might not be the only factor. Sometimes it is, but it's one of the factors. In other words, what we have to do now, ladies and gents, is we're moving on to that halfway point or whatever in the talk, that we have to understand why it's worth the extra money. In other words, we've talked about the reasons that people choose cremation, and they're not true. It's not better for the environment. It doesn't solve mobility issues. It's not quick and clean, et cetera, et cetera. But why is it burial worth the extra money? So that's what I want to focus on for the next few minutes. I'm going to give you some headlines. Some of the main, there's a lot to talk about. We don't have time for everything. Some of the main reasons why Jews throughout history have focused on burial. Then we're going to open it up for questions and comments. If you want more details and more explanations, we can get into it then. And right now, I'm just going to give you a few of the headlines, things to think about. I will give you some resources at the end. I'll put them into the chat, and Rabbi, you can share them, including my book, a couple of websites, and things like that for those who want more more information. Okay, so number one, in the Kovno ghetto in World War II, there was a rabbi named Rabbi Ephraim Oshry. Rabbi Oshry actually survived the war, survived the camps, and he told the following story. He said one day he was in his little room in the ghetto, and a blonde-haired, blue-eyed Nazi SS officer barges into the room. Rabbi Oshry believes he's about to be killed, and instead, the Nazi officer starts speaking to him in perfect Yiddish. Rabbi, I'm a Jew. I have fake papers. This is how I've made it through so far. But I have a question, Rabbi. You see, I'm a very sick man, and I only have a few weeks to live. And I know what they're going to do to me when I die. They're going to bury me in a Nazi cemetery, surrounded by Nazis, with a Nazi cross over my body forever. Rabbi, I could wear this for a few months to survive, but to be there forever, I can't. Rabbi, can I be cremated to avoid the fate of being buried in a Nazi cemetery? And Rabbi Oshry took the man's hands and said, my dear, dear child, no, you can't. In normal times, a Jew must do whatever they can to have proper Jewish burial. The whole thing, burial, the burial society, the Chevra Kadisha, it's called the Holy Society, the preparation of the body, the little bit of dirt from the land of Israel that's put in, the Hebrew prayers. Even in these terrible times, the Holocaust, right? The minimum, definitely, you must try to avoid cremation. Do everything you can to be buried. And he cited verse after verse from the Bible, Talmudic reference, the early authorities, Maimonides, the Code of Jewish Law. This is actually a major thing in Judaism. The first reason why Jews throughout history have focused so much on burial. Do you know that when a Jewish community is formed, the first things that the Jewish community is supposed to do, a new community, they move someplace, set up a Jewish school for the kids, right? A mikvah, and a ritual bath, and burial society. That's how important it is. This is not just bagels and lox. Nothing against bagels and lox, huge part of my life. But a relatively minor thing in Jewish law, right? Maimonides never had bagels and lox, I am convinced, okay? The point is, this isn't just a cultural thing. This isn't just a minor new thing. This is actually fundamental. Jews have sacrificed tremendously to provide burial for their loved ones. That's the first reason why Jews have focused. It's a huge part of our religion, of our tradition. By the way, just to give some modern twist on this, anybody here recognize the name Gilad Shalit? Recognize that name? See, some few people are nodding. He was that soldier, that Israeli soldier that was kidnapped by Hamas, and he was kept in a Gaza jail for 5 years. And a number of years ago, we made a trade for him. 2,000 terrorists were let out to get him back. And to be honest, it was a very controversial decision in Israel. We're all happy that he got out. Actually, he got married recently or something. Well, delighted that he got out. But giving 2,000 terrorists is not so simple. By the way, 10% of them have already been rearrested for new terrorism since then. So that's a famous story. It was from Page News. What you might not have heard is that several times in the history of the state of Israel, Israel has traded hundreds of living terrorists to get back dead bodies. People we knew for sure were dead, to give them proper burial. That's how much this is important to who we are as Jews. That's the first reason. This is a core part of Judaism of who we are. Number two, if you were to make a map of monotheism, where people believe in one God, and another map of where people bury, it's fascinating. The two maps have an incredibly close overlap, meaning wherever you find more belief in one God, you find higher rates of burial. Wherever you find less belief in one God, meaning polytheism, belief in many gods, the Far East, right? Or atheism, post-Christian Europe today, you find high cremation rates. Just think of it, Far East, polytheism, cremation. Europe for 1500 years, Catholic Church, there was no cremation. Last 50 years, post-Christian Europe, cremation is the norm. The Middle East, right? Obviously Israel, very little cremation. There's one crematorium in all of Israel. Very, very little. Islamic countries, there's no cremation. They don't allow it. They got it from us, right, indirectly. The United States, by the way, the Bible Belt has much higher burial rates than the quote unquote secular coast. It's interesting that there's this natural connection between belief in God and burial. There's a lot of literature as to why that is. I have my own very simple theory. People remember, people know, consciously, subconsciously, the very beginning of the Bible, beginning of the Torah, where it says that every human being is created in the image of God. Now, it's not a physical thing, right? God is not physical. But what it means is that our physical bodies have a certain holiness to them. You don't mess with that. When you were 8 years old and your pet dog, Spot, died, right? I can virtually guarantee that your parents did not say, okay, honey, right? You get Spot, I'll fire up the barbecue. Like, you didn't cremate little Spot, right? What did you do with Spot? You buried him in the backyard. Because get this, we bury things we love. We bury treasure. And we burn the garbage. Isn't that an amazing thing? This is why people who believe in God intuitively gravitate towards burial much more. By the way, to give you an example of it, anybody know what one does with a Torah scroll that is desecrated, that is damaged beyond repair? But if a Torah scroll is damaged, you take it to the scribe, to the sofer, and they fix it. It can be fixed. It happens all the time, right? Little pieces of ink chip off or whatever. What happens if you can't fix it? It's an old Holocaust one, or remember the flooding in Katrina? There were a bunch of shuls, in Louisiana. What did we do with those Torah scrolls? We buried them. Do you remember the ceremonies? Almost every Jewish cemetery has a place for where ancient books, holy books and Torah scrolls are. We bury a Torah scroll because it's a holy object, and you bury it. Now, here's a question. God forbid this would ever happen. Just a hypothetical example. Let's say there's a fire in shul, and you want to go and save the Torah scrolls, the holiest objects we have. Would you do it? Would you save the Torah scroll? Yeah? Well, I hope so. If there's no danger to you. Meaning, if the firemen say, yeah, we got it under control, go get your scrolls so they don't get like smoke damage, of course, go get them. But if the firemen say, hey, buddy, you can't, it's dangerous. You're not allowed to, in Jewish law, you're not allowed to try and save the Torah scrolls. Because no matter who you are, man or woman, old or young, healthy or sick, observant or not so observant, you are holier than a Torah scroll. And just like we bury a Torah scroll, a person gets buried because a human being is holy. Wow. We've talked about the reasons why Jews have always been into burial. Number one, we talked about the idea that this is a core part of Judaism, not a minor thing. Number two, the idea that monotheism and burial go together. Number 3, connected idea, the idea that we bury treasure, we bury things we love, we burn the garbage. By the way, different traditions have different views of that. In Hinduism, right, fire is a purifier, right? They believe they're purifying the body. That's all these open air cremations in India right now, the terrible COVID, crisis they're having. In Judaism, what's a purifier? Not fire, water. That's the mikvah, right? That's why you wash your hands before bread meal on Shabbat. That's why a woman will go to the mikvah, right? That's why Hasidic men go to the mikvah, or any men go to the mikvah whenever, in the morning before prayer. It's the womb recreated. Water purifies. The Kohen Gadol, the high priest, on Yom Kippur, the holiest person in the holiest place, the temple in Jerusalem, on the holiest day of the year, right? The 3 holies, time, space, everything together. He went to the mikveh 5 times. 5 times. Water purifies. Fire destroys. Interestingly, what the Chevra Kadisha, one of the things that the Chevra Kadisha, the burial society, does with the body is they cleanse it. Sometimes actually in a mikveh or pouring water on it. It's a cleansing because water purifies. A couple more ideas and then we'll open it up for questions and comments. Perhaps this is the deepest and the most important idea. You can't talk about burial and cremation and the afterlife without talking a little bit about the soul, right? The main part of everything. So I'm going to talk about it for a few minutes, not because it's not important, just because many people hear about that. They want to talk about the practicalities. And if you want more information on this, we'll talk about it when we get to questions and comments. But to give you the principle behind it, raise your hand or give me a thumbs up on the chat function or whatever it is down there. Raise your hand or give me a thumbs up or something if you have ever visited a Jewish monastery or a Jewish convent. Anybody? Anybody? No, it was a trick question again, guys. I know you haven't. Why haven't you? Because there aren't any. Have you ever wondered why? What, you think that 2 billion Catholics are stupid people? Right? Celibacy for the Pope and the priests and the nuns. What, you think they're stupid? Or the Far East? In the Far East, in Hinduism and Buddhism, right, they're all celibate. The clerics are all celibate. The Dalai Lama. Why is that? They're smart people. Well, it's a philosophy. It's a philosophy that we don't share. But by the way, there are 2 very different traditions, right? Catholicism and the Far East. But on this point, they actually agree. On this one point, they believe that if you want to be spiritual, you want to rise up, get close to God, then what do you have to do? Leave behind the physical. Ignore the physical. The physical is bad, only to avoid sin, to avoid temptation. But you want to be spiritual, you avoid the physical. The physical world is one of suffering, it's one of sin. That's why the more spiritual you are, the less involved you are in the physical world. That's why the Pope is celibate. That's why priests and nuns, they marry. That's the whole, it's an ideology. They're not stupid, they just happen to believe that. What does Judaism believe about the physical world? We believe the physical world is good. God is a good God that created a good physical world. And you have to manage things. It's right, it's the rider on the horse, not the horse on the rider. You don't want to be a glutton and everything. But the idea is that physicality is good. So if physicality is good, right, then the body is good. You understand how if the body is bad, it makes sense to just burn it? But Judaism doesn't see the body as bad. The body is my partner. My soul and my body, we are partners. As a soul, right, which is the key, obviously, the center. But as a soul, I could not give charity without my hand giving charity. I could not hug someone who is down without my arms. The physical body is good, so you treat it with love and respect. You lay it gently down to sleep. You don't get rid of it and burn it. One final idea, then we'll open it up for questions and comments. So I don't know about you, but I have this sometimes I get these monologues in my head I don't even know where they come from sometimes. So I want to share with you this monologue that I have in my head. And I don't know if it's a real person or where it comes from, but it's been in my head for about 10 years. Older Jewish guy calls together his kids and says, kids, I want to tell you something. I may not have been the most religious person on the planet. I didn't have a very strong Jewish education. I really didn't do much Jewishly. Maybe looking back, if I knew more, I would do more. I don't know. But there's one thing I do want to tell you. I was born a Jew. I'm proud to be a Jew. And when I die, I want to be buried as Jews have been buried for thousands of years. I want the rabbi to say the prayers. I want the Chevra Kadisha, the Burial Society, to prepare the body. I want a little bit of earth from the land of Israel. Because my last statement on planet Earth, I want it to be, I may not have been a perfect Jew, but here lies a proud Jew. So I don't know about you, but that touches me. Let's summarize, and we're going to open it up for questions and comments. We started out by saying that this is an uncomfortable situation. It's an uncomfortable topic. We don't like talking about it, but we have to because we're making decisions. You may have already made a decision today without, or in previous times, or you may be making a decision, and we have to have information before it's those times of grief at the end when it's so hard to think. And we went through the reasons why people choose cremation today. If we missed any, you can, please raise them down. We'll discuss them. And if we went through those reasons, mobility, environment, quick, all that kind of stuff, they all fall away. They're not true. Just think about them. Research. They're not. I'll give you some sources and resources. There's only one reason for cremation that actually makes sense. It's cheaper. So why is it worth the extra money? I tell people, guys, when you propose to your beloved and you gave her a ring, I assume you didn't get it at the bottom of a Cracker Jack box, right? Some things are worth a little extra money. Burial's one of them. Why? Well, I gave a few subjects. We don't have enough time to go through everything. This is a core part of Judaism, central part of being Jewish throughout the ages. Monotheists connect to burial, intuitively, the holiness of the body, just like the Torah scroll. We bury treasure, we burn the garbage. Right? The idea that the soul and the body are partners, physicality is good, therefore the body is good, and I treat it with love and respect. And the final idea that I may not have been the most perfect Jew in the world. Here lies an imperfect Jew, but here's a proud Jew. And so when I die, I want to be buried as Jews have been buried. So that's what I wanted to share with you, ladies and gents. We have a little time left. I wanted to leave for you to ask any questions and comments. You can turn off your mute. Rabbi, how do you want to do it? Just let people go for it or chat or?
Please put your hands together for a wonderful presentation. Doron, that was fantastic. Thank you very, very much for that beautiful presentation. Before we move along to Q&A, I do want to mention a couple of things. Number one, Razy, take it away.
I just want to mention that, first of all, thank you. Thank you for sharing everything. I want to dedicate this class today on burial and cremation to the aliyah of the neshama of my dear, dear friend who passed away exactly last year today. Today is her first yahrzeit, Taiba Razel, Basi Yosef Yitzchak. May her soul have an aliyah. As we speak, her children and her family are all at her grave, praying by their mother's grave. She has 8 children. Oldest is 13 and youngest is about 2. So I think it was very apropos that on her yahrzeit we should have a lecture that perhaps helps other Jewish people and Jewish souls make the Jewish decision, and that should be in her merit. So thank you.
Okay, and I do want to mention also a couple of upcoming events. We do have our Shavuot celebration, honoring the date in which the Jewish people received our mission statement, our Torah, our values, our destiny. On Monday, May 17th at 5 p.m. We're going to begin a service. We'll read the 10 Commandments at 5:30, and we'll have a delicious dairy dinner at 6 p.m. On Sunday, please mark your calendars. Sunday, July 11th at 12 p.m., we'll be hosting Manfred Goldberg, a Holocaust survivor who will share his story of his bar mitzvah in a Riga ghetto. Fascinating story about his survival and his commitment towards and his pride in Judaism. And finally, on August 5th at 6 p.m. Mountain Time, we're going to be hosting Israeli rocket scientist Ari Sacher for an Inside Israel's Iron Dome discussion. It should be a fascinating conversation. So please join us for those. And now what I would like to do is I'd like to open this up to a conversation on this subject matter. Feel free to fire away on any subject you have related to the Jewish thoughts on death, mourning, pain, aging, anything related to the subject, burial, cremation. Please open up your mics. Thankfully, it's an intimate group today on a very, very important subject. And I want everyone to have an opportunity to ask as many questions as they'd like of Doron. Doron, you've been phenomenal, and we'd love for everyone to have an opportunity to speak to you directly. Open
We
up your...
encourage you to come on camera, even if your background is flying in the skies somewhere. That was a great background.
Craig.
Not happened on too many Zooms, I could say, that the pilot's on a Zoom. But whatever your background is, whether you're in sunny Florida or in Washington or Wyoming, join us face to face so we could really feel the intimacy of the group.
I'm just glad that I wasn't the passenger in that airplane on Zoom, noticing my pilot on Zoom. That would have been a little bit disheartening. Yael, you asked a question in the chat, which what's the best way to make sure that we get buried correctly? Obviously, we can't control our loved ones' choices. How do we secure the issue? Will purchase in advance? It's a great question. Thank you for asking it. I am a huge, huge fan of pre-planning and pre-paying. Now, if you do the math, pre-paying may or may not be smart financially. Depends what you would do with the money, if you'd invest it smart, all that kind of stuff, right? I'm in favor of it anyway. The difference is insignificant. And this way, I'm involved in this kind of thing. Life events, even death, is supposed to bring families together. Religion is supposed to bind people, right? This is the time when the family is supposed to come together. And when things are unclear, when things are, the kids have to argue and decide what to do. This one heard this one heard this one thinks it's worth the extra few $1,000s, this one is in greater financial difficulty, they don't think it's worth the extra few $1,000s. It leads to arguments and grief, and instead of a beautiful time for family to come together, it becomes a fight. And there's disharmony. And by the way, I wish I could tell you this was not common. This is incredibly common. So what I recommend is you have everything done. You work it out, and it's very, very clear. You have on you, the rabbi's name and number and Instagram account and email and chat. When my time comes, all decisions, end of life, burial, everything goes through the Chabad rabbi, right? Go. You have the funeral home already arranged. You have the plot already done, so that the kids, the grandkids, friends, family, they can just come and be consoled and share the tragedy and the connection and have it all in writing. I get calls every once in a while, but one happened actually about a week ago or 2 weeks ago. This guy had been davening at a Chabad, being part of a Chabad community for 30 years. He put tefillin on with the rabbi every day. But his first wife, right? They never changed the will. And bing, went back and cremation was in the will. And it was so painful. The man was cremated. We couldn't change it because she insisted, and bing, bing, So get it in writing, get it organized, get it clear. That way, no mistakes will happen. And that way, the final moments, it'll be a beautiful moment instead of an argumentative one. So thank you for that great question. Okay, other questions, comments?
And I just wanted to point out that if anyone has an interest in securing a proper burial or anything other related to their afterlife requests, including wills that you'd like to donate certain parts of your estate to Chabad so we can continue a strong and proud Jewish future, please feel free to reach out to me. I'd be happy to have that discussion with you. We are here to serve you in the best possible way. If anyone has any questions about burial, please see me, schedule a time, we'll have a conversation. I'd be happy to discuss it with you. Moving along, next.
Please.
Steve, go ahead.
You have to unmute yourself. Hold on. No, we can't hear you, Steve. Hold on. Steve,
Wait a
you're,
minute. Okay, now I'm unmuted. You hear me? Well, thanks, Doran. That was beautiful.
Thank you.
I know Zalman talked to me once, and I know how fervently he believes in this matter, and I was interested to listen to this because that's not in my plans. There's something about burial that always has viscerally bothered me. I don't want to be down in the dark, without light, buried. It just, I do believe I'd much rather see what's left of my body go up in smoke towards heaven. I also feel guilty. I have to tell you this. I know where my father and mother are buried. I haven't been there in, I can't tell you how long. I feel very guilty about that. And I'm not sure I should feel guilty about it. It's a lack of respect, a lack of honor. And it bothers me, and I don't think it should be set up that way. I think of myself as there's a divinity in me, but it's something that's not my body. My body is aging. It will decay altogether. It's not my soul. My soul is something else. The body, you say garbage is burned, but I guess garbage is burned because it contaminates. It gets diseased. It breeds disease. That's why garbage is burned. And the body, when it's finished living, it's my tool for my soul to exist here and do things on earth, but it has a time limit. And when the time limit is over, it will become diseased and full of contaminants that are not good for the environment, and it should be disposed of. That's not who I am. And I should be remembered for whatever it is I might have done that's of value in this world. But the body is something else. I know that Carol, my ex-wife, who is under the apple tree. I couldn't have buried her there, but I could put her ashes there, and I'm comfortable with that. And I also like the fact that ashes can be divided up amongst loved ones, and a little piece of that, if that's what they want to do, can be held or put wherever, hours or states away to go visit a burial site. I'm uncomfortable with the idea of going under the ground and staying there for all eternity. And
Okay, so Stephen, let me address some of that. If you have more, I'm glad to hear more. But
that's it.
You said a lot, and I appreciate it because I think you've articulated very well what a lot of people think. And so that's good. Honesty is good. Judaism is in favor of questions, in favor of learning. And the head of my yeshiva once, the rabbinic seminary where I went, he once came back from a Shabbat he had spent with some cousins. This is 30 years ago, but it's stuck in my mind unbelievably. And he said that he didn't mention who it was, obviously, but he said that, he mentioned at the Shabbat table with his cousins that he had just learned, some new thing about Shabbos, that he'd been doing something wrong for like his whole life, and he was like changing his practice. I don't know, some ritual thing. I don't know what it was, or law. I don't know what it was. And his cousin said to him, I don't know, what are you talking about? I've been doing Shabbos, the same way my whole life. Said, I'm not changing anything. And the head of my school came back and he said, that's the most un-Jewish thing you could ever say. The idea that like we're stuck and we're not open, and and so asking questions and articulating what you're articulating, that's why on the in the Haggadah, on Seder night, it's questions and answers, and the Talmud is all back and forth. So that's good. In other words, it's good not to just be a quiet rock and just to listen to go by, but to actually say, look, I have questions. It doesn't make sense to me. So I appreciate it. Okay. Let me try and address a little bit about what you've said. And in the chat, I put some resources. The best resource, of course, is Rabbi Zalman and the Rebbitzin, right? That's what the rabbis and Rebbitzins around the world, and Chabad especially, is for. That's who you go to. Chabad.org, the biggest Jewish website by far online, has a tremendous amount of material on all subjects, and on this subject, it has a video of me and a couple articles, and it's got some other people, as well. There's a website specifically on this subject that a friend of mine put together. It has a lot of my material and some other material called peacefulreturn.com or .org. I think they both work. Peaceful Return, I put it in the chat box. It's got English, Russian, Hebrew. My book obviously has a lot, and for Stephen, for somebody like you that has obviously thought through these issues, all those resources I think would be helpful. But let me try and address some of what you said. Okay. The idea of guilt. I've noticed this a lot, and you were honest enough to actually say it, where many people don't visit their parents' or grandparents' graves and feel bad about it. And therefore, there is some kind of a psychological advantage to choosing cremation, because it's like we're declaring in some way that burial is not really important. Because if I were to focus on burial and make an effort for it, it would make me feel even worse about myself, because I recognize burial is important and I didn't visit so-and-so, right? So it's easier in a way psychologically to sort of a self-justification, and we all do this all the time, right? To say, okay, burial is not that important anyway. That's why I started, one of the first subjects that I talked about was the Moses example. Remember that whole Moses example? There's two famous burials in the Bible. There's tons of burials in the Bible. Jacob is buried, Rachel is buried. It's all over. It's amazing. The laws of Yom Kippur have 3 lines, and burial is mentioned like so many hundreds of times. It's like weird. Like, if I was creating a religion, I don't think I would really care about burial, but our religion does. Our history does. And the two most famous ones are Abraham burying Sarah at the beginning of the Bible. That's in Hebron. We still visit the grave to this day, and God burying Moses. And the reason why I brought that example was to show that visiting is not really crucial, is really not that important. So I agree with you. I don't think there should be any guilt about not visiting graves. Zero, none, right? But that doesn't mean, therefore, I won't have a grave. It just means, listen, I gave my parents proper burial. They had proper burial, and it's not my thing to visit. Okay, give a contribution to Chabad in their memories. They didn't ask me to say that, but they deserve it. But I mean, you don't have to visit. So again, the guilt thing, I get it. Judaism is not about guilt, believe it or not. I know we're always surprised by that. that Jewish guilt is like this thing. We're not into guilt. Forget it. Just if you chose cremation for a loved one, right? Don't kick yourself in don't kill, okay, make a contribution in their name, right? And move on, right? We're about the future, l'chaim, not the past, right? I'm not into guilt. Judaism is not into guilt. So I agree with you. That has nothing to do with having a grave or not. Okay, that's the first thing, right? Don't feel guilty, but yes, have a grave. Okay. The other thing that you mentioned, people always say that You know, like I don't want to be eaten by the worms, claustrophobia, stuck underground, right? I think that's a little bit of the direction where you were going. And I respect that. I mean, you know, I get claustrophobic. You know, I remember I wasn't always claustrophobic, actually. When I was younger, I wasn't. And I can even remember the time. It's about 15 years ago. And I was following my kid into this little, like, you know, like the tunnels the kids crawl in. And my kid was crying, little kid. And I went to get him. And I was like suddenly like inside this little circle. And I remember getting really, really hot. And I thought that they turned the heat up or something. And it turns out that like nobody else was hot. And like I'd been claustrophobic. Like, I don't like being like in small, dark places. I get it. The only thing is, like, either the soul is aware or the soul is not aware of what is happening after death, right? It's either way, right? It's a binary choice, I think, right? So if the soul is not aware, then it doesn't matter what you do because you won't be aware. It's just a physical shell and it's, you know, no idea. If the soul is aware, so then there's the question, okay, is the soul going to do better, appreciate being buried underground or being burned in an oven? Now, you and I can't answer that question because we're not in that position, right? Nobody's come back from cremation to or decomposition to share. But interestingly, we do actually have an answer to the question. And people say, well, how do you know? How do you know what happens in the afterlife? So I don't know if you have children. You know, I have children. I think you know, many people on the call, you know, have children. Like, if you're a parent, if you're a normal parent, a good parent, do you just give birth to the child and then, you know, leave them to figure out things on their own? No. Any normal good parent, when they create something, when they have a child, they try and guide and teach the child what the child needs, right? This is healthy eating. This is, you know, math. I mean, things that you need for life to have a good life, right? You know, parents, good normal parents, don't like, you know, just ignore the guide the child. So God's a good parent. And I don't understand everything about Judaism, believe me. I don't think anybody really does. Maybe you, Rabbi. But we do actually have a very strong tradition, a strong tradition passed down for thousands of years that we understand a little bit about what the soul wants and needs. Our tradition says, this is from the Zohar, right, and other Kabbalistic Jewish mystical works. The rabbi will give you more information after if you want. But I'll give you the headlines. We think of the Jewish system of mourning, 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 right, as being for the living, for the mourners, right? The 7 days of Shiva, the 30 days, the memorial, right? The year of saying Kaddish, right? I mean, non-Jews have written with great, you know, beauty, like about how the Jewish system is so cathartic and so beautiful. But you know what? That's all true, and it is for the mourners. At its deepest level, it's actually for the soul. Our tradition says that during the 7 days of mourning, the soul goes back and forth between the place of burial, its body, and the Shiva house. Imagine if you have a partner. Imagine a woman who's been married, happily married for 50 years. The husband dies. She comes back from the grave, puts on a red dress, and goes out partying that night looking for a new guy. Is that normal? Of course not. When you have a partner, you don't leave it so quickly. The soul and the body are partners. It is not just an empty shell that is done with after. It is not a car that is discarded. There's a reason why my soul has my body, right? And they don't just separate so easily. The soul stays near its body, going back and forth. After 30 days, a little bit more of it goes up. After a year, most of the soul, the elevated parts of the soul, are up in heaven, and there's something remains down below. This is why a place can have holiness, right? Spiritual and physical are not separate in Judaism. The whole point of life is to bring spirituality into physicality. They go together. So I agree with you. Our tradition agrees with you. The soul does know what's going on. And the soul desperately wants burial. Everything in Jewish history and Jewish thought talks about how the soul desperately wants burial. And cremation is extremely painful for it. You ever see a Jewish funeral where the mourners, God forbid it happens, the mourners tear kriya, right? They tear the clothing. I don't know if you've ever seen that. It's a tradition in Jewish funerals. It's called tearing kriya. It's really a double phrase because kriya in Hebrew means tearing. It's like tearing a tear. So in modern times, I've noticed that in some places, the funeral home gives a ribbon and they cut the ribbon, right? A very nice idea. It's actually not the point. The point is that it's my clothing. It's my, during the 7 days, the person is sitting there. So imagine that when a person dies, Mother Earth, the planet itself, tears kriya. A tear is opened up in the fabric of the earth. It's not okay. It's not normal. We don't just go on. It hurts. Then slowly, lovingly, the body is placed back in the earth. But there is always a scar, a headstone. The person is never forgotten. They've made a difference. This is part of the reason why Judaism's holiest teachings focus on the importance of burial. Death is not an end. Death is a transition to the next world. And to make that transition work smoothly, burial is so important. So I hear what you're saying. As I go through each of the points, I think I've addressed them. I'm glad to, again. At the end, I always come back to that, final story that I shared with the guy who says to his kids, I may not have been a perfect Jew, but I'm a proud Jew. And when I die, I want to be buried. That Jews been buried for thousands of years. And to me, that really resonates. I hope that helps you a little bit. I'm glad. I put my email in the chat box. I'm glad to be in contact further about this. Okay. Any other questions?
Thank you, Stephen, for that fantastic question and that wonderful answer, Doron. Moving along, any other questions? Now's your chance. We do have another few minutes, but we're wrapping up now. So please, if you have a question, come off mute, come onto the video. We'd love to see you. Fire away. Doron, in Wyoming, oftentimes people say fire away. I have to be careful when speaking to people from other places.
Okay. It's okay.
Any other questions?
Let me just end with one idea then, if I can.
Please.
Thank you for the an opportunity to spend some time with you in Wyoming. It's an interesting thing that Judaism teaches us, our tradition teaches us that 6 days a week, right? You build the world, you improve the world, right? You take responsibility for the world, right? And then the 7th day, we sit back at the end of the week and we say, listen, in truth, I'm really not running the show. God's in charge and, I do my best and that's it. Our whole lives, we push, we change, we grow, and we do everything that we can. And our tradition teaches that at the end, I'm not going to outthink Judaism. I'm not going to control. I'm not going to build a machine. I'm going to sit back and say, this is the decree of God. This is nature of plants, of animals. And I think it's a very beautiful thing of remembering of having some humility and remembering our connection to nature and to God. And I'll tell you that, I have never seen that choosing burial hurts the family, right? Interestingly, never. People understand burial. Cremation, I've rarely seen a case where somebody is not turned off, hurt by it, doesn't have a place to go. Leon, you have a question? Please.
In Judaism, is there a big difference in the importance of being buried in a Jewish cemetery versus not necessarily a non-Jewish cemetery, but maybe somewhere that in your past is important to you, or in your backyard or something? Is there a lot of importance in that in Judaism?
So it's a great question, Leon. Thank you. The full answer I will leave to the rabbi because I know we're running out of time. But to give you the short answer, yes, we are big believers in being buried in a proper Jewish cemetery. By the way, this is not unique to Judaism. Try and be a Catholic and be buried in a Muslim cemetery. Like, or vice versa. I mean, like, you know, it's interesting. Around Jerusalem, there's Catholic cemeteries and Protestant cemeteries. And it's not just like, oh, parochialism. There's an idea. The idea is, at least for us, is that we are a community, and we relate to each other in a special way, and we have a bond, and we have a responsibility, and we are family connected and ideologically connected and religious. And the way you demonstrate that connection is that it's a permanent connection. And this is the way that we relate to the afterlife and our role in history, right? Why is it that when they desecrate a 500-year-old cemetery in Ukraine, it bothers me? I'm not from the Ukraine. I don't speak Ukrainian. I've never been there because it's me. It's the Jewish part of it. So the idea is, yes, in a normal, again, the Holocaust is different and this is different. So if there's no choice between burial or cremation, definitely burial anywhere is better than no burial, 100%. But yes, being buried in a Jewish cemetery has a lot of important symbolic and mystical undertones, and you should definitely go for it. The rabbi will explain a little bit more. Okay, ladies and gents, it's been a real pleasure. Thank you very, very much, Rabbi Rebbitzin. I've given you some resources there. The best resource, of course, is Chabad. And if not, you know, if you have something specific for me, you can email me. Thank you very much. All the best, everybody.
Thank you, Doron, very, very, very much. This was fantastic. We really appreciate having you. For anyone who has follow-up questions for Doron, you could email him directly, or you could reach out to me, Rabbi Zalman at jewishwyoming.com or info@jewishwyoming.com. We'd be happy to share with you more information on any subject that you have questions about. Finally, just wanted to point out again, it's very important, this conversation, and I think we have many opportunities as it relates to the learning that we gained from this. If anyone wants to discuss with me the possibility and look into the probability of helping us to find a space where we can create a burial plot for the Jewish community in Wyoming, I'd love to work with you together on that and see if we can't make a space for local Jewish people to find a burial spot. We'd be happy to work on that together. And ultimately, while this is sometimes a difficult conversation, it's a necessary one, and we're proud to have all of you here with us to have this conversation. Looking forward to keeping in touch with you. We hope to see you on either Shavuot or the upcoming lectures that we had listed earlier. Have a wonderful day. Be in touch. Take care. Bye-bye.